So welcome again, good afternoon, and today we are talking about Imports 101. Our agenda for today is first, we'll take a look at some general notes on imports, and then the meat of the discussion will be around some import samples. So we'll take a look at creating new constituents. So these are constituents who aren't in your database yet. We'll also take a look at updating existing constituents. So these are constituents, or these are people who are already in your database or already have a constituent account in your database, but you would like to make updates to their account. We'll also take a look at creating donations for new and existing constituents, as well as creating interactions for new and existing constituents. There is another type of import that you can do for notes. We won't take a look at that today, but when we get to the import screen, I'll show you where to do that as well. The process is going to be very similar for different types of imports that you can do in Bloomerang. The required fields are just going to be different, and we'll talk about that as we go through the import. So first, when setting up your import file, a couple of important things to remember. If you have individuals and organizations, if this is the first time that you're putting them into Bloomerang, you need to have them on separate files. The reason for this is that the required fields to create a new individual or a new organization in your database are different. If you're looking to create new individuals, you're going to need first name and last name. Whereas for organizations, you need an organization name. So those are two separate fields. Another thing to keep in mind is if you're importing things like addresses or even the names, it's important to parse out the different fields. So you can't just have a field for name. You would have to have it as first name, middle name, last name. For an address, it would have to be home address, home city, home state, home postal code. And notice I'm being very specific as well, because you might have constituents who have more than one address. You might have home address and the work address. That's the same for all the different contact information. So you could have home email and work email. Those need to be separate. In general, you want your import file to have up to 2,000 rows, and the file size or the file limit is 2 megabytes. Now the 2,000 rows, this includes your header rows as well as if there are any hard returns within your file. For example, if you have any addresses that use up 2 lines, those would count toward the 2,000 rows. So it's always safe to be a little bit under to make sure you fall within that limit. We have a whole section in our knowledge base that outlines different help articles for you. Let's take a look at that now. We have a couple here. First is how to set up your import file. I particularly like that because it actually gives you some import templates that you can download. So if we click into this file, you can download some templates here. We have 4 templates that are included that you can download. These are individuals with donations, individuals without donations, and then organizations with donations and organizations without donations. I'll explain as well, once we're doing the import, why we want to separate those with or without donations. Another article that we have here, I'm going to click back here. Another article is import fields. This shows you the different fields that you can import to. So this lists the default fields that you can import to. For example, if you wanted to import to employer, if you were importing individuals, this is a free-form text field, so you can type in whatever you would like. This is the constituent's employer. And because it's a free-form field, you can type in whatever you like. If you wanted to import communication restrictions, for example, we have set values for this. So if you want to import to this field, you have to select one of these values. The way that you use this help article is the name of the field would be the column header in your file, and the cell would contain the values. Another article that we have is the actual walkthrough of how to import data into your Bloomerang database. So this has a short video with it as well. And this has the step-by-step instructions. Now we're going to go through this today in this class, but if you need step-by-step instructions, this is a nice thing to refer to. If you like reading things more than watching a video or listening, you can follow the instructions here as well. The last article that I wanted to show you is our import errors article. Now, it might sound a little bit scary, the potential to have errors, but don't be afraid, because if you encounter an error, and I'll show you that today as well, it tells you exactly what's happening and it gives you some suggestions as to how to fix that error. And we'll take a look at that today. So those are some help articles that will help you set up your file and get you set up for your import. We also recommend, of course, sending your file over to our support team. They will be more than happy to look it over and look at any potential errors or any potential formatting that you need to fix before you do your actual import. And then when you're ready, you can even chat in and someone will walk you through the import step by step. So if you need a little bit more help or more guidance, that's available to you. Another thing I wanted to note in terms of imports is how we take a look at duplicate matching. I mentioned earlier that in today's imports, I'm going to show you how you can update constituents who are already in the database. Now, how do you avoid creating duplicate constituents in the database? For individuals, the system will automatically take a look at their first name and last name, plus one of the following: either email address, phone number, or their mailing address. So let's say you have your import file. If there's a first name, last name, plus only one of these things in the file that matches what's already in the database, the system is going to recognize that constituent, and instead of creating a new constituent account, they will append whatever you're adding to the existing account. For organizations, instead of first name and last name, it takes a look at organization name plus any one of these things. It has to be the name plus one of these things. We can't match just based on the name, because you might have some common names in the database. For example, if you have a John Smith in there or a John Williams in there, that could be a common name. We're not going to assume that it's the same person. So you need this additional piece of information to make sure that it's the same John Smith or it's the same John Williams. Another thing you can do if you're updating constituents, or if you know that these constituents are already in your database, maybe they're coming from a report that you exported from Bloomerang so that you know they're already in the database. If you have the Bloomerang account numbers, that functions as an exact match. Even if you don't have the name and contact information, if you have the Bloomerang account numbers, the system is going to recognize them. All right, let's jump in. So first, we'll take a look at a couple of different imports here. So I've prepared a couple of different files. I have a file here that has a combination of some new organizations and some existing constituents that are already in my database. So for these constituents, they are not in my database yet. So since these are organizations, I'm having their organization name, their address, city, state, zip code, work phone, website, organization type, which is a custom field in my database. So yes, you can import to custom fields as well. You just have to make sure to create the custom fields first before you can import to them. Create the custom fields and the values. Think of it as the data in your file already needs somewhere to go in Bloomerang. So if that thing doesn't exist in Bloomerang yet, you can't put things in it. So create those fields in Bloomerang first, and then you can import to them. And when you're importing to custom fields, you have to make sure that whatever you add as values are exact matches to what's in the database. So I have new constituents here. I also have existing constituents. And because I have the Bloomerang account number, I don't need anything else. As long as I have that Bloomerang account number, the system will recognize them based on that account number. I'm also updating some custom fields in here for my volunteer custom fields. So these are my attributes and availability. So let's hop into Bloomerang. So if I'm looking to import, that is this icon with a cloud and an arrow. Anyone who has a user account in Bloomerang can import. It doesn't matter if you are an administrator or standard user. Both types of users can perform an import. Now, if you've never done an import before, your screen is going to look a little bit different. You're going to have a blue button that says create your first import. I've already done quite a number of imports, and as you do more imports, your screen is going to look like this. We'll talk about that more as well. For now, we're going to click New. First, you want to name your import. And I typically want to name my import something descriptive. So if we ever go back to it, I know exactly what's there. So I'm going to say new, and on my list of constituents were Black-owned restaurants in Indianapolis. And then I'm updating volunteers with this import. We're going to click Next. And then step 2 asks us, what are you trying to import? And this shows you the different types of information you can import into Bloomerang. First, we have constituents. So any default values, name, contact information, employer, birth date, and any custom fields, as long as they're already in Bloomerang, you can import to those fields. You can also import donations. This is an important distinction. This isn't all transactions. This is specific to donations. So we aren't able to import pledges or recurring donations. This is specific to donations. You can also import interactions. So interactions, any touch point that you have with the customer or with the constituents. So maybe you called them or they volunteered, those would be an interaction import. And then you have your note import. Now, constituent fields are available to be imported from anywhere. So for example, if I have a list of donations that I'm looking to import, I don't need to do a constituent import first before doing the donation import. I can include their constituent information in a donation, interaction, or note import. Another thing to note here is that for constituents, you can create new constituents in Bloomerang via import. You can also update existing constituents via import. For donations, interactions, and notes, those will always create new entries. So you cannot update a donation that's already in the system or an interaction that's already in the system. So when you're preparing your file, think of all the information that you need. If there's any custom fields that goes with that donation or interaction or note, go ahead and put that in the file because you won't be able to edit that with an import later on. If you need to edit it after importing, that would need to be a manual process. So that's an important thing to note. Also, donations, we mentioned earlier that constituent information can be added with the donation, interaction, or note information, but you cannot mix donations and interactions in the same file. You can't mix donations or notes and interactions in the same file. That's because of their required fields. Some of their required fields are the same. For example, in a donation import, the required fields are date, amount, and fund. For an interaction import, the required fields are date, subject, purpose, and channel. For notes, it's date and note. Notice that all 3 of them have date as a required field. So if I have a file that has 3 columns for date, it's a little bit harder to keep track of where things should go and where things should be mapped, so keep those separate. Today, we're going to start out with a constituent import. We'll also go through donation and interaction import as well, but we'll start out with our constituent import. Step 3 asks you what types of constituents are in your file. And if you remember, you have to separate individuals and organizations in different files. For today, the file that I prepared for us today is new organizations. So we'll select organization. And then we upload the file that we want. So right now I'm using Google Sheets. And what we need in terms of the file type is CSV, or comma separated values. This is available even if you're using Excel or Numbers. You should be able to export your file as a CSV file. So I'm going to go to File, download that as a CSV file, comma separated values. And then I'm going to go back to Bloomerang, select my file, which brings us to what we call the mapping screen. This is step 5 of 6. There are a couple of things you want to take a look at here. So first, because this is a constituent import, it's bringing in the constituent fields. All the fields on the left are the fields in Bloomerang. All the fields on the right are the columns in your file. Any field that is in green, like this, is a required field for this import. So you have to be mapping something to it. Any other fields that are in gray are not required. So first you want to check that it's picking up everything in your file. So if I go back to my file, I have 11 columns as shown here. So if I go back to Bloomerang, I should have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 fields that are being mapped. Wonderful. That means it's picking up everything in my file. If I counted only 10, for example, I can always click this button to add another field. So let's say it missed something in my file. I can click Add Another Field, which allows me to select what field in Bloomerang I want to map to. Let's say, for example, I had formal name in there. So I would click the field, and then it's going to ask me what column from my file would I like to map to that field. So let's say I'm going to click name for now and update. So this doesn't really match, but if it had forgotten or if it didn't pick up anything, that's how you would add an additional field. Or if you notice that it's picking up more things, it's a smart tool, but it's still a tool, so you always want to check. You can always click X to remove that field from being mapped. The second thing that you want to check is that everything is being mapped correctly. So I have organization name, I'm mapping organization name, account number, website, work address, city, state, zip code, work phone, attributes, organization type, availability. Okay, wonderful. So it's mapping everything to the right field. As I mentioned earlier, it is a smart tool, but you still want to check. So sometimes, for example, if I'm mapping to attributes, or if I have a field in Bloomerang for tributes and attributes, the system might get confused there. So it's always good to check because you know what's in your database. So it's always good to have human eyes check for those things. The third thing that you need to take a look at, which we don't have any here, but if you have any contact information, for example, you have work phone number here. If I also had home phone number, let's say I was mapping work phone number and home phone number, the order in which they are mapped matters because whichever is mapped last is going to be mapped as the primary field or the primary value. What do I mean by primary? So let's say I have two email addresses in the database. I have my work email and my home email. Whenever you send emails out of Bloomerang, it's only going to send to the primary email. And if I have two, the system needs to know which one is the primary. If I'm importing, whichever is mapped last, just going from top to bottom, that's going to be marked as primary. So that's something that you'll want to take a look at in terms of contact information. So addresses, because you can have a home address, a work address, or a vacation address. Phone numbers, you can have work, phone, mobile, fax number, and email. You have home and work. So whenever you have those things, check that everything is being mapped in the correct order. You also have a preview screen here. Now you can map up to 2,000 rows, but this preview will show you, or you can scroll through the first 20 constituents or the 20 lines in your file. So we can see kind of how it's going to look in the database. So we have Barbecue Heaven, that's the address website, it's a business, and we can keep scrolling and see how that's changing based on what I'm bringing into the database. Once I'm satisfied, I can click Next. This is where we verify our information. You can see here that it's showing me that 20 new constituents will be added, as well as 10 existing constituents will be updated. How does the system know that I have existing constituents in the database? We go back to the duplicate matching. Is it looking at name plus a piece of contact information? Or it could also be looking at the account numbers, and that's an exact match. So again, if I have the Bloomerang account number, it doesn't matter if I have any of the other pieces of information. I don't even have to have their name. As long as that's the correct Bloomerang account number, that's going to recognize them as an existing constituent. Whenever an existing constituent is recognized, it's going to ask you, how should you update existing constituent in the database? You can either update what's in the file, you can trust what's in the file, or you can trust what's in the database. Trusting the file will overwrite data in Bloomerang, except for contact information. It's always going to add those as new entries. But let's go back to my file. Let's say I had attributes in there or availability. If I already had, for these constituents, if I already had something in the database indicating what those are, and then I import new values, and I say trust what's in the file, it's going to go with what's in the file, and it will replace what's in the database with what's in the file. This is especially good if you know that you have more updated information in the file. An exception to this also is if you have some pick multiple custom fields. So you can have more than one value in a custom field. If you're importing to a field that can have more than one value, then it will add what's in the file to what's in the database. The other option is to trust what's in the database. This is not going to overwrite any existing information in the database. It's just going to fill in the blanks with data from the file. So if there is a field in the file, for example, organization type, and the constituent didn't have that yet, it will add that attribute to that constituent. Now, once we're happy, everything looks good, we can click Run. And just to make sure, we ask, are you really ready to run this import? And this tells you that you will not be able to undo this. And this is true. Imports are largely irreversible, at least from the customer side and from the support side as well. So there are a couple of things you want to make sure before you do the import is make sure that your file is set up correctly. And if you're trying to import a large number of data into the database. Let's say you do have a file of 2,000 rows. Maybe test it first with the first 5 rows in your file. Import that into the database. Spot check those accounts to see how it looks in the database. That way, if there's any changes that you need to make, you can easily make those corrections on those 5 records and then make the correction on the file for the rest of the constituents. So that's something we always recommend. Another thing you can do is, if you're not sure, send the file over to our support team. They'll be happy to take a look and give you some recommendations. Now, things do still happen, and if you did an import and then needed a way to undo it, we do offer a data service where a member of our development team can write a utility to undo the import. However, if we have to get our dev team involved, that's going to that's likely going to incur a cost for your organization. So we want to save you from doing that, so make sure that your file is set up correctly. So in this case, we want to run the import, so we're going to go ahead and click Run. It's going to process for a little bit here, and it's telling me that my import is complete. So a couple of things we want to do here. First, let's look at what happens when we go back to import home. If this is your first import, you're now going to have a section for recently processed imports. The recently processed imports shows the 5 most recent imports in your database. So if I import another one today, which we will, it's just going to bump off the oldest one from the list. So first you'll see the date and time of the import, as well as the file name. And if you click on this drop-down arrow, you'll be able to see the full details, and you can also download the import file from here if you needed to review it again for any reason. Let's take a look at the full details. This shows you the template that was used. If you recall, this was what we named the import earlier. And if we scroll down here, it has now created this template in my database. We'll take a look at that. It shows you the date and time of the import, who ran the import, the file name, how many constituents were updated, or how many constituents were created or updated. Also, if there are any rows skipped. We'll come back to that. First, let's take a look at the import template. The import template gives us a snapshot of what happened when we did the import. So it's giving us the details here. This was a constituent import for organizations, and this is how the fields were mapped. So if we added any fields or if we rearranged the order, it would show here as well. Now, since my import was complete, a good thing to do is go back to my file, pick someone or pick something from my file, let's say Comida, and search for that constituent in the database. So we see here it's already coming up. So this was a constituent import, so I just wanted to create a constituent account for them. We brought in the address, and we brought in a custom field for their organization type, which is a business. So we see that here. And if we scroll all the way down, it is showing us that this was just created just now when we did the import. So it's always a good idea to, after you've successfully imported, pick 2 or 3 from your file, go to their constituent account, and look at the fields that you imported to. So we brought in the address, we brought in the custom field. Let's take a look at someone else. We have account number 10, and what we updated on that record was our custom fields for attributes and availability. So I'm going to go to the profile, and if I go to attributes, there it is, volunteer. And for availability, I added weekends. So this is a multi-select field, and because he already had day and evening in there, we added we added weekends from the file. Wonderful. So always check, spot check a couple from your file. Take a look at how their information looks in the database, so that if I had a bigger list and I wanted to make any adjustments, I can make those manual changes to those 2 or 3 or 5 that I tested the import with, and make adjustments to my file before importing the rest of the constituents. We're going to pause for questions at the moment before we tackle importing donations and importing interactions. We have a question here. How do I indicate those who want to be unsubscribed in communications? That is an interesting question. So first of all, in terms of communications, we have communication preferences here. Communication restrictions is something you can import to. However, email interests are designed for the constituent to manage. So things like if they make an online donation, they're still going to get that online receipt. And there's going to be a link in there for them to manage their email preferences, so they can unsubscribe from there. However, the communication restrictions that we have here, this is if a constituent wants to indicate if they don't want to be called or mailed or solicited, that we can import to. The name of that field is communication restriction. So you can add communication restriction as your column header in your file. And you can add these values: do not call, do not mail, or do not solicit. And because this is a pick multiple field, you can select any number of these. When you're setting up your import file, just separate each value with a pipe. Let's see if I have any here. So let's say this constituent is available to volunteer on the weekends and during the day. That's the pipe, and I can just do day, and that means he's going to be tagged with both of those values. So again, communication restrictions, that is something we can import to. Email interests, we cannot import to because it is designed for the constituent to manage that on their end. Thank you for that question. All right. Let's move on to importing donations into Bloomerang. Oh, before we do that, there's a great question here. If you choose trust the import and your field is blank, and it's not a pick multiple field, does a blank value override information in the database? Wonderful question. It does not. So you see here, these fields are blank. If they had something in the database, it's not going to erase it. You can't delete information via import. You can only overwrite or add new information via import. So nothing is ever deleted via import. So if you're looking to deliberately delete values on constituent accounts and you think you're going to try to import a blank or a null value into that field, that's not going to work. It's just not going to touch it. Thank you for that great question. All right, let's move on to importing donations. So as I mentioned, donations, it's always going to create a new entry. You cannot update existing donations that are already in the database with an import. So we have our file here. I have, again, a mix of constituents who are already in my database. I have their account number, and I have some new constituents in my file as well. And in fact, because I have the Bloomerang account number, I don't need any of this other information. So if I wanted to, I could just take that out. Or we can keep it in there, but it's going to look at that account number. Now, If you have the account number in there and for some reason you kind of mixed up the names, there is a possibility that you might update that account. So that's just something to be aware of and be careful of. So this is a new donation import. So I have my constituent information here. And if we scroll to the right, I also have my transaction information. For transactions or for donations, the required fields for an import are date, amount, and fund. Other fields like campaign and appeal, of course, are recommended, but they're not required. So these are the things that you need to think about. Okay, this is what's required, but are there other fields I already want to put in because I can't update this later on? So as many fields that I can put in, I should add it to my file now. So we have a couple of donations here. We have the donation amounts, the fund. I also added my campaign and appeal. I also added a column for method. If you leave or if you don't have a column for method, it's going to default to cash. So if you know, or if you have additional fields based on that method, go ahead and add those fields in now. And know that there's additional fields that you can add. For example, if we were trying to enter a donation manually, you can take a look at, okay, what are the fields here I want to add? I can split it out by amount and non-deductible if I want, my fund campaign appeal. If I click check, I can add a check number, I can add a check date. If it was in kind, I can add a type, fair market value, or description, and all of those other fields. Note is available for all types of transactions. So let's go back to our file. So we have a couple of donations here that were made via check. So I've added their check number. These in-kind fields don't apply to those donations, so I've kept it blank. But I also have some in-kind donations in my file. They're not going to have a check number because it's not via check, but I know that they have an in-kind type of goods, and I can put in my in-kind description of what was donated. I can even add a note if I want, for example, if I wanted to specify what's included there. So maybe it has some masks, some hand sanitizers, and some face shields as well. So I can include that. So these are in-kind donations that they've dropped off at our facility. So once I have all of the information, so again, I want to check, do I have everything? Are there any other custom fields that I want to include? You can add that as well. Another thing to keep in mind here is it is possible for a constituent to donate more than once, especially if this is the first time you're bringing in your information into Bloomerang. Let's say you're a new customer of ours and you're bringing in historical information. So you're bringing in past gifts. So you might have constituents who have given 2, 3, 4, however many times in the past. An important thing to note here is you need to have one line per transaction. So if we have here account number 749, it looks like they're donating twice. You would have one line per donation, and you should have the matching information as well. So if I had the name and contact information in here, or if these new constituents made in-kind donations as well, I should keep the contact information too for that matching information. Because if I have Sheldon Cooper there and I just have another Sheldon Cooper, the system, without the contact information, the system is going to is not going to assume that that is the same Sheldon Cooper. So if you're importing multiple donations, have the same contact information for each time that that constituent donated. We'll take that out for now. So again, let's download this as a CSV file and let's start our donation import. We're going to go to Imports, click New. So I'm just going to say New Donations as of June. Click Next. Actually, I'm going to click back here. Remember that this is going to create an import template. We'll click Next. This time, because these are donations, I want to select Donation. These are individuals, and then we upload our file. Because this is a donation import, earlier we saw that it brought in the constituent fields, but because this is a donation import, if we scroll down, we also have the donation fields. So this is very important. You'll only have the donation fields if you select donation import in the beginning. So we'll take a look at our file again. I have 20 columns that I'm bringing in. 10, 10. Perfect. I want to make sure that they're mapping to the right fields: first name, last name, account number. Now, I've done a number of imports, so I know exactly what the fields are called, but if you don't, remember that you can map manually, or you can refer to that help article called Import Fields, or you can just download one of our import templates to help you get started. So address, email, date, amount, fund, those are the required fields for an import. Campaign appeal, method. See, I didn't type it out exactly in my file, but it picked that up. Wonderful. Check number, description type, note. I can scroll through and I can see the donation information as well as the constituent information. Okay, and then we'll click Next. There are a couple more things going on here, so let's take a look. So first, it tells me that 4 new constituents will be added, 20 new donations will be added, and then 6 existing constituents will be updated, and 5 existing households will be updated. What's going on here? So we have 20 new donations, but I have 6 constituents, 5 constituents, 4 constituents, that's 14. So that doesn't equal 20 donations. That's because there were people in my file that donated more than once. So I have 20 donations total, but I have constituents who donated more than once. So I have my new constituents that are being added. Because I have existing constituents, it's asking me how am I going to update existing constituents. And it's also telling me that existing households will be updated. This tells me that there were account numbers in my file. So the only way that it would be updating existing households is if there were household account numbers in my file. And if there are any household account numbers in my file, that's going to add the donation to the head of household. So that's automatically going to put it on the head of household. We also have a section here where it tells us that it's going to skip the following 4 lines. And this tells us why. First of all, the line here corresponds to the line in the file. So line 8, 9, 10, 11, this is line 8, 9, 10, 11 in my file. Let's take a look at why it doesn't like that. It's saying unrestricted is not a valid value for the field fund. I misspelled unrestricted. So the system is not going to assume that I misspelled something or mistyped something. It just won't make any assumptions. It's going to tell me, hey, this value doesn't exist in your database. we're going to skip this. And when it says it's going to skip this, it's not just going to, oh, bring in the constituent information and then just skip the donation information. It's going to skip the entire line. Now that's good to know. So this tells me what I need to fix. So remember, we have that help article for import errors. So that gives you samples of what the error could be, and it gives you suggestions on how to fix it. So in this case, it's pretty obvious that I misspelled that, so I probably want to fix that in my file. So I have two options here. I can continue and run this and then fix it after, or I can maybe cancel out of this, fix this in my file, and then restart the import. Either way is okay, but I'd like to show you what happens if we go ahead and run it. So we're going to click Run. Again, we're being given a last chance just to make sure. So we're going to click Run again. This time, when we run the import, it's going to tell us that the import was successful. We'll give it a moment to process. That's taking more than a moment there. While that's processing, let's go ahead and take a look at that import errors document. So for example, this is what we encountered. Unrestricted, misspelled, is not a valid value for the field fund. So you can easily correct that. So this is where this import article will come in handy. So now our import is complete. It's giving us an option to download the skipped records. We'll come back to that. For now, we'll go back to Import Home. We know that it's going to bring it in as the most recent import. If we click on the drop-down, there's now an additional option to download the skipped records. We're going to go ahead and download that and see how that looks. Once I open the skipped rows file, it's going to contain exactly the information I had in my original file. So it's going to have all of that information, but at the very end, it's going to add my import error. And it tells me what the import error is. In this case, it was all the same. So what I just need to do is correct it in my file for all of the errors. And then I just delete that column because I don't need that. Now what I need to do from here is download that as a CSV file because I still want to put that information into Bloomerang. So I still want to proceed with the import. So we're going to go back to Bloomerang, but this time, instead of clicking New and starting the import process all over, I'm going to scroll down and there's my import template. We know it came from the same file. I can just click on that. I can review the details if I need to. Yep, that's the import we want. And then I can skip to this step of selecting a file. Notice our import steps were cut down from 1 to 3. So import templates are particularly useful if you have a recurring import that you need to do. So for example, if you have volunteer activity that's recurring and you're always importing to the same fields, the values are just changing, use the import template. So from here, we're going to select a file, select my skip rows, the corrected one. It remembered everything and how we mapped everything. So once we click next, our errors are gone. We have 0 new constituents that will be added because they're already in there, but we're going to add the new donations. And then we'll click Run. So don't be afraid if you have any import errors. Check that help article and see how you can correct your file. And it's not a showstopper for you. So you can still import the information that's getting through correctly and then go back and initiate the import again for those that might have been skipped after you fix the errors. So that was our donation import. So I wanted to show you here that you can do a combination of constituents who are already in the database and a combination of new constituents. And you can always take a look at the different fields that are available based on the type of donation that you're importing. The last import that I wanted to show you today, we're going to go through it a little bit quicker because we're pretty familiar with the process by now, but we're doing an interaction import. So again, I'm doing an interaction import, a combination of constituents that are new and constituents that are already in my database, and I have their Bloomerang account numbers. I have my required fields for date, subject, purpose, channel. I'm also tracking volunteer hours via custom field in my database, so I'm adding that, and any notes that I want to add to the interaction. I'm going to download that as a CSV file and initiate an import. We're going to click New. These are my June volunteers. We're going to select Interaction of Individuals, and then we'll select our file. We're going to check our mapping. So we have our constituent fields, our interaction fields. We have 15. Wonderful. Everything's being mapped to the right field. We can scroll through the preview, click Next, and see how our import is looking. Looks like we have 4 new constituents that we're adding with this import, 31 new interactions, as well as 27 existing constituents. No errors, wonderful. And it's giving us the option for how we want to update our existing constituents. We'll click Run, yes for sure. And it's processing. And again, I'm going to recap this as this is processing the import. So it's always good to make sure that you're setting up your file correctly. We have a number of ways where we can help with this. First, you can go to our help articles and download some import templates that you can start with. You can start filling out your information, or if you already have an Excel file of information, just compare it with the template to see if maybe you need to rename your column headers or if you need to split out any fields. Once you have your file ready, you can always send it to our support team for review. They'll tell you if there's any obvious errors that they might find, but you know your information best. You know how you want to put that or how you want that to look in the database. So test it with like maybe the first 5 lines in your file. So import those first 5, spot check those constituents before importing the rest. You can always import new constituents or update existing constituents, but for donations, interactions, and notes, those are always going to generate new entries. So you want to make sure to include all of the information that you have or that you need so that you don't have to make any corrections later on. And of course, as another reminder for the duplicate matching, you need more than a name. You need the name plus a piece of contact information to make sure that we're matching that to the right constituents, but account numbers are an exact match. So if you have the Bloomerang account number, that can be the account number of the individual or the organization. That's going to be an exact match. If you have the household account number, that's going to add the new information to the head of household. And if you have any questions, please let me know. We have a couple of minutes left to take a look at your questions. We have a question here. How does the import look on the head of household? let's see. So I know that in my import file, 749 here, and I just know that because I prepared the file. I know that this is a household account. So if we search for the household account, that's me and my husband. There's the new donation that we imported. Those are the new donations that we imported. And if we click on the donation itself, it added it to my account as the head of household. So you're going to see it on the household account, but if you click into the donation, it's going to take you to the head of households account. We have another question here. I have donations I import on a monthly basis for donors with recurring donations. How are the new donations I import each month linked to the existing recurring donation? Great question. We cannot import recurring donation payments, but what you can do is if you've already imported it as a donation, from here, you can click Actions and convert that to a payment. So let's say this $150, I can convert this to a payment. It's then going to show me any open pledges or recurring donations. I'm going to show a lot here in my database because I do a lot of testing with my account in my database, but it's going to show me any open recurring donations or ongoing recurring donations and any pledge payments or any pledges that are still open. And I can apply it to that instead. So let's say if I wanted to apply it to this pledge payment, I would just click that and click Convert. If there's any differences between the donation and the payment details, it's going to show that in red. So in this case, if I convert it from a donation to a payment, it's going to inherit the fund, campaign, and appeal of the pledge or the recurring donation. And then I can choose to convert it to a payment and make those changes, or keep it as a donation if I would like. Thank you for the question. Another option that I would like to suggest for that is if you have payment processing set up with Bloomerang. So if you have a transaction processor, Stripe, or Moolah that's connected with your Bloomerang account, you can set up those pledges and recurring donations to auto process within the database so you don't have to do your imports every month. So if that's an option for you, I would strongly suggest taking a look at that. Thank you for the question. Okay, we have time for one more question here. The question that we have here is, how do you import to soft credits? Unfortunately, you are not able to import to soft credits. So if you look at the donation fields that we have here, these are the different transaction fields you can import to. And unfortunately, we don't have one for soft credits. I will pass that on to our product team to make sure that that suggestion is recorded. All right. Well, thank you everyone so much for joining me this afternoon. I hope this has been helpful for you. If you have any additional questions, you will get a copy of the recording, and I'll include the links to this folder for help documentation on imports. You can also initiate a chat with our support team, or you can send them an email. You can send them your import file via email, and they'll be happy to take a look and provide more guidance. Thank you so much, and have a great afternoon. Bye.